Natasha Helfer-Parker runs an online private practice called Symmetry Solutions. This podcast is a joint production between Symmetry Solutions and Mormon Mental Health. To find out more about Symmetry Solutions, please visit symmetrysouls.com. That's symmetry, SOLS.com.
Mormon Mental Health Podcast is a production of the Open Stories Foundation and relies on donations from its listeners like you. To help keep this podcast alive, please consider becoming a monthly subscriber. Any amount will make a difference. You can click the right-hand donate button on mormonmentalhealth.org. All contributions are tax-deductible within the United States and go towards podcast production and building community support and program development for Mormons on various paths and journeys. Thank you for listening. Hello, everybody. This is Natasha Helfer-Parker, and we're here today with Symmetry Solutions Strategies, which is a weekly platform we try to put out here at Symmetry Solutions, where some of the providers here at Symmetry will get together and address a question we've received from the audience. So today we are going to address a question we received from a Mormon/LDS family. This is it sounds like this is a parent, and they asked how to support a teenage son who unexpectedly had a mission or possibly another experience, because we also have a lot of college age students returning home, cut short, but who also is almost an adult. I'm finding this dynamic really tricky. So I think that this is very apropos for what a lot of families are going through these days. And today I've got Jana Spangler and Jenny Elledge talk to me about this. Jana is out of Salt Lake City area and Jenny is out of the Orlando, Florida area. So welcome to the program, everybody.
Thank you.
Hi, how are you?
Nice to have you both. Yeah, so let's go ahead and let's just talk a little bit about what we've seen, first of all. So the LDS Church started sending home all of its international missionaries several weeks ago due to this COVID-19. And for those of you who maybe don't know, a Mormon mission is something that most young adults, most LDS Mormon active young adults tend to go on from the ages of like 18 to 23-ish, somewhere around there. And it's it's an 18-month to a 2-year commitment, depending if you're female or male. And yeah, it's a pretty big ritual. It's a pretty big identifying thing within the LDS community. So to have that cut short, and of course, some people, it was cut short like maybe 2 months before returning home anyway. For some people, they were only out a month or a few weeks before they're already having to come home. So I can imagine both for individuals and for the families, this is definitely a disruption. So let's just share some thoughts about what we're seeing, kind of like what do we know, what's happening, how's the church handling the situation, what options there's going to be. I don't know, Jana, do you want to start us off?
Sure. So the church came out with a policy, I don't know, it's been a few weeks ago. Looks like March 31st, they came out with some guidelines of what decisions these missionaries are going to be facing. And it looks like they have some options, and it's different for where you were in your mission, if you were international or in the country. So it's pretty complex, and you can go to Mormon Newsroom and look up those options. But it sounds like they would like missionaries by the end of April to make a decision about whether they want to continue their mission, if they had enough time left in that mission, and continue to have their same release date and go back and serve if possible and when it's possible in the country where they were serving. Or they can opt to be released and then receive a new call in a period of time, 12 to 18 months from now. So there are decisions that these missionaries are having to make as they come home, how they want to handle the rest of their mission. And there's a lot of, I think, emotional pressures and internal pressures and external pressures to try to figure out what is best for them. And I'm seeing a lot of struggle in that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's so it's such a challenge to have something, I mean, anything in life, we like things planned out. We like to know what's coming next. And of course, COVID-19 has affected that on so many levels for so many of us in many different areas of life. But I think especially for young adults who are like thinking the next year or two is planned out. I know what I'm doing, right? And not only do I know what I'm doing, but I feel like it's maybe divinely okayed, so I feel good about this decision. And this is such a difficult time for young adults anyway, to kind of know what the next step is. And so now to be in kind of this limbo where, oh, I thought I knew what I was going to be doing for the next year or two of my life, and now I don't know. And it's not like you're coming home with a lot of options on what to do next. There's like, you basically get to stay at home for a while. And, who knows what's going to happen in the fall with universities and colleges and schools or programs, technical programs maybe that you're interested in. There's just so many challenges. Even, I think one of you mentioned even relationships, like part of being on an LDS Mormon mission is to not have romantic relationships. And so, but some people left girlfriends and boyfriends back home. So do I reconnect with them in that way or not? And am I gonna go back to a mission or not? And are there guilt feelings there? Do I feel pressure that I should return? Maybe if I don't, what if I'm relieved I got sent home early because I wasn't really enjoying myself? And now there's guilty feelings about that. And maybe parents are like assuming that you're going to go back when you're like, actually, I don't know that I am. So you can see how they're like the complications are, there's a myriad of possibilities. So Jenny, what are your thoughts about like the complexities of all the different options that people are having to think about?
Well, it tends to be a good problem to have a lot of options in life. However, it can make the decision-making process a little bit complex. So as a parent, my general recommendation would be, regardless if your kid was on a mission or not, but once they go from being your teenager at home to being, 18, 19, 20 and moving, hopefully out on their own and doing their own thing, you want to shift from me, a parent, telling you what to do to encouraging them to make their own decisions. So as your missionary child is contemplating all of these things, I would just kind of take the approach of, sounds like a good idea. Like, because there's no one right answer. We already know that because the church has a myriad of options of different things to do. So if we know there's no perfect decision to be made, then parents, I would say, hey, what do you think you should do? And no pressure. You don't have to decide the perfect thing to do for the rest of your life, because that's life. We learn from our experiences what works and what doesn't work. So
yeah, and as you're sharing that, Jenny, I think to myself, sometimes the reason why this can be difficult, first of all, if you've left on an LDS mission, or if you're coming back maybe as a freshman in college, right? You aren't that far away from being a minor, right? So like that magical birthday, right? That's 18, and now all of a sudden you're quote unquote an adult. It's a difficult transition anyway, because usually people when they're 18 are still financially at some level dependent on their parents for the most part, at least here in the United States of America. And they're usually sometimes and especially now, living in the home of their parents. So this is where I think some power dynamics can get into tension, because 18-year-olds and 19-year-olds and 20-year-olds tend to be in a developmental phase of their life where they want to be making some of their own decisions and thinking for themselves and feeling like they're autonomous in some ways, and yet they're not. And then it's a classic, well, my house, my rules, my money, my way, is how a lot of times parents can feel, and legitimately so. Like, I'm not going to pay for something that I don't support, for example, right? Or I'm not going to necessarily put up with behavior in my own home that, so these are very tender, interesting power dynamics and differentials that I'm sure some people are going a little nutty on right now. Any thoughts on all of that, Jana?
Yeah, so I think it's good to notice kind of some of the cultural pressures that are creating this problem for missionaries and for their parents and families, these returning missionaries. Not only were they sure where they were going to be over the next couple of years or year or whatever, but they have always had, we offer in the LDS faith this path that is pretty set from a very early age of what expectations are and what am I going to do. And always there are exceptions, but there are a large number of these missionaries who from the time they were young were planning for a mission, that were planning for college, that knew exactly how that was going to happen. This is the way we do it. We get accepted to college, we defer that, we have it all set, we know exactly when it's going to happen. So this may be the first time in many of these kids' lives when they are now, it's not going to plan. Or I have some choices ahead of me, because for the most part, it's been kind of scripted. Even if they've opted into that scripting, the scripting was there for them. This is the way we do it. So that's going to feel disorienting. And then recognizing how structured their lives have been while they've been on their mission. Like they are used to having a schedule of getting up and studying and doing what they do throughout the day, and this is how we do it. It's all so structured. So going from a highly structured plan to now it's really hard to do all of what you were doing before and what the plan was. That's not an option now. Now what? And we have limited options because we're all in staying home and in quarantine to differing degrees. So it's a lot of pressure, and it's okay for that to be really hard. So I think just sometimes what we really need is just to recognize the situation we're in and have it be okay to struggle with it a little bit. We are people, humans are like this. We want to fix things. We want to fix what's going on for our children when we're parents. We don't want to see our kids struggling. We don't want to see them having problems. So I think our really good impulse is to always we've got to find a solution for them, rather than maybe we just need to sit and listen to them, understand where they're coming from, and just be with them in some empathy. That maybe there's no way to fix this, but what I can do is listen to you and be with you and be a listening ear and understanding and have a supportive hug for you and be an advisor to the extent that they want an advisor.
Yeah, I would totally second all of that. I do think that there are some interesting cultural dynamics within Mormonism. We tend to have a hard time knowing how to treat newly adult children as adults. Mm-hmm. I do think that, if you're going from a highly structured kind of Mormon home where there's a lot of like routine and kind of expectations, which we tend to do in our culture. Not every Mormon family is like that, but a lot of us are. And then going into a missionary type of setting where it's also very highly structured and rule oriented, what you are allowed and not allowed to do. And then they're returning home. We sometimes are lacking in our ability to find ourselves knowing how to treat adult children. And Jenny, you kind of briefly touched on this as far as like, what are some of the things that, kind of being a supportive parent instead of like a dictating parent. What are some other ideas you have as far as like, what are some maybe typical things that you would encourage parents of adult children to not necessarily worry too much about, or to have maybe firmer boundaries on? Do you have any ideas on that?
Yeah, you don't need to worry necessarily about your adult children's sleep schedule because they handled that before on their own. So just let them go ahead and manage that on their own. You don't need to worry about their meals, so to speak. You can go ahead and have your typical family meal in the evening if that's what you normally do. But if you don't, then to say kind of, hey, we want you to kind of live your life similarly to how you had it before. So if you were making your own meal, why don't you go ahead and keep doing that? Why don't you go ahead and keep doing your own laundry too? So you don't want to pick up more additional responsibilities that, even though you're trying to be helpful, of course, but just you want to encourage the independence to keep happening. I will add that just because of our line of work, we do see missionaries coming home that have underlying mental health issues. That is something that parents can kind of keep an eye on. So if you're noticing that your kid that came home is like staying in the room all day long, they're not really interacting with the family, and that's happening, many days in a row type of thing, then you might want to kind of talk to them and see, how they're feeling. If there's more anxiety happening around all that, you can talk to them about, how to, calm yourself down, or you might need a little bit of professional help with that one, but just kind of keep an eye on that too. And I have one more idea. A lot of times, and especially now, we want to feel productive so that we feel kind of good about ourselves. And if we're going from a highly structured program to a very non-structured program, just be mindful as parents to not encourage the messaging that, oh, you need to get a lot of things done in order for you to be a productive, child of our family type of thing. This is a weird time right now. So let's not have too much self-judgment or pressure on the kiddos right now.
I'm super glad, Jenny, that you brought up mental health, because one thing that we probably should all be aware of is that, so those years like 16 to 25 is actually a time period where mental health issues can come up that were not there necessarily when your kid was a kiddo. So we actually see a lot of, whether they're going on missions or they're going into the military or they're going to college, a lot of times this is the time frame where certain types of disorders, especially things like schizophrenia, bipolar, certain personality disorders, can be exacerbated because they're leaving that kind of structured space where they maybe had tendencies or traits, but they weren't quite coming out because the structure and routine of their home environment allowed enough of a safety net. Whereas now that they're out and about and also in a different developmental phase of their adulthood, you might be seeing things that you haven't seen before, eating disorders, even certain types of depression or anxiety, OCD, can be exacerbated during this particular developmental phase of young adulthood. So that's concerning. And as Sarah brought up, Sarah's one of our other providers, in this time of COVID, it can be really hard to know how to access mental health care if you're dealing with something a little bit more difficult, like she was talking about, like there's been some missionaries who've returned who have really had severe symptoms of mental illness, like psychosis and things of that nature, and whether or not they've been able to be seen in a hospital setting, et cetera. So if you're dealing with anything more on the severe end of things, that's so important. Hopefully, again, as a parent of an adult child, I know what we say when you call Symmetry Solutions. It's like your child's 18. Well, they have to call themselves. We can't. The medical laws and the kind of the ways that we treat adults is, if you're 18, you're considered an adult, and now mommy and daddy can't be the ones, coming in and doing that work for you. So that can be really frustrating as a parent of a newly 18 or 19-year-old, where you're very much still kind of in that caretaking role and supportive role, but aren't allowed by the medical community to really, be that involved. And especially if your child is resistant to getting help, or doesn't know how to get help, or doesn't want to admit or recognize that they need help in those particular ways. So those are really difficult situations. And all I'll say to that is, of course, try to work as much as you can with your local healthcare providers, your pediatricians that they used to see. They maybe oftentimes have resources to people you can call. Here at Symmetry, of course, we do online telehealth. So we are a resource, as well as we can, if we're not a good fit, we can hopefully point you into a direction that would be a good fit. But I'm so glad you brought up that point, Jenny, of watching for mental health symptoms.
Yeah.
Really briefly, I'd like to talk about spirituality. Jana, you had talked a little bit about just some of the things that maybe some missionaries are struggling with in regards to, like, why would I have been called to this mission if I now have to come home, or why am I going to be called to a different mission? Like, for a lot of people, being called to a mission is a highly spiritual, connective process with their God and their relationship with the divine. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, this is training ground for life, I think, right? I think anytime that we have felt some really strong connections with the divine, with God, that we feel like God is aware of us, and especially there's a strong narrative around missions, especially that we are called to where we're supposed to serve for a specific reason. And so people can be challenged in that, and can be challenged in their faith in unique ways at times like this. Why is this happening? And sometimes we, I think in our culture, feel like we should have more control than we do over circumstances. If I act in a certain way, then I get certain blessings, or if I act in a certain way, then God takes care of me in certain ways. And some of those narratives, depending on how strictly we hold them, can challenge us. Again, I think that it's important to just start to recognize some of those narratives, what has come up, pay attention to how you're feeling about those things. Sometimes our narratives need to shift to fit the reality of what we're experiencing. And so it actually, rather than being, it can be a very stressful time, but rather than giving into that, it can be just really helpful to welcome that this is part of maturing our spirituality. It is part of paying attention to our lives and learning what we need to learn. And just because things didn't go the way we thought they should does not mean necessarily that God has abandoned us, or that is all off. It is part of our human journey to have to shift our perspectives, and we can look at some of these as an opportunity to widen the way we look at things. That widening can often be uncomfortable. So I think we all need to have a lot of self-compassion during this time as to what we're feeling. It's okay and it's very normal to have a wide range of emotions, and for different people to be dealing with this differently. Some people, there are many missionaries who go out who maybe didn't necessarily really want to go, but felt a duty to, felt like it was on some level they bought in, it's good for them, or just for social acceptability. There's a wide range of reasons why people choose to go on a mission. So some people may come back and be like, woohoo, I got cut short. And it's guilt-free. No one can have judgment over why I came home. Other people, this is really devastating. Like, if there are certain personality types that really feel like they want to finish what they started. They feel like something's been stolen from them in some way. That can be really hard to reconcile. So just allowing space for all of us to have different reactions to this is really important. There's no one way we should be reacting to this. There's no one way to cope with it. The best we can do is just let this time bring you into some learning about yourself and some soul searching. It can be a really great time to connect to God and to our spiritual lives in a new way.
Thank you. James Foy says, I don't think I could go back out if I came home because of something like this. That's just an opinion being shared on our page. So Jenny, any final thoughts from you? Or go ahead, Jana, sorry.
Well, I was just going to say there can be a lot of pressure for some people, because I can imagine, I think especially at the developmental stage of these ages of the people dealing with these missionaries, there's a lot of comparison going on. And like, what will people think if I decide to go back out? What will people think if I decide not to? And there's so much pressure on that. So just, I don't know, it is a time for a lot of empathy. And It does not mean that you're a better person necessarily if you decide to go out and finish your mission or not, or maybe there's an acceptable amount of months that you have served that now you can say, I've done my job. Like, really listen to yourself, because I really believe that there's something deep inside each person that knows what is good for you. So taking some time to get quiet, get with yourself, really listen to, try on different decisions for yourself and see how it's feeling to you. And just recognize that what you do just needs to be right for you. It's a lot of the same decision making that a lot of these kids went through when they were deciding to go on a mission or not. We may have to reface that decision all over again in a new way.
Yeah, no, thank you. I love all those thoughts, Jana. Any final thoughts from you, Jenny, as far as just either advice for parents or advice for the missionaries themselves, or, thoughts of words of wisdom, I guess?
Words of wisdom. Yes, I think one thing the LDS Church does well is the teaching of individual revelation. So we know that by those words, that means that revelation or decision-making processes are going to look differently for everyone. So as Jana was speaking about, making sure that you notice that for yourself, if you're a missionary child, adult, young adult, if you are feeling pressure about how your decision is going to look from other people, that's generally not the best way to make a decision. You tend to regret that or doubt that. It doesn't feel as, it doesn't feel as good as like making a decision for yourself. And this might be, as Jana talked about earlier, one of the first times that you really get to do that, especially now since you have several options to choose moving forward. And there's so many unknowns right now about the COVID virus. We have no idea how long it's going to be around. We're kind of taking this week by week, everybody, the whole world. And we have no idea when a vaccination will be out. Well, let's not get into that whole thing, but we have no idea how long this is going to be. So when you have a decision, you can only make the best decision with what you know. And so try to make the best decision with the information you have versus what other people will think of you. And parents, I would encourage you to take that same approach and encouraging your kiddo to do the best they can.
I love all those ideas. I don't know, Jen, do you have any final thoughts before I move on?
I would just encourage us all to be kind to ourselves and be kind to other people. We're in just a crazy, unprecedented time in most of our lives. And there can be a lot of anxiety that comes up, and there can be a lot of judgment that I'm noticing between people, how people are doing things, how people are doing their social distancing or not doing their social distancing, how people are choosing to do their missions and not, whatever, if they're choosing to see their girlfriends and boyfriends in between, how they're doing. All of those are natural impulses, and sometimes it's just our way to cope with the difficulty that's going on. But I would just encourage everyone to exercise some self-awareness and some compassion for yourself and others to just try to help us all get through this, and to watch out for our own self-care and mental health during this time, because it's tough. It's rough out there, people.
Well, I agree. When I think about the Mormon culture, and it's not just even so much Mormonism as it is sometimes American culture and even other Christian cultures, we tend to be planners and we tend to be doers. And we're not getting to do either one of those very well these days. And so I think that this is kind of an opportunity, like you've said several times, both of you, to flex our flexibility muscles. And that comes with discomfort, that comes with a lot of feelings on both sides of the equation. So feel the feels, right, is I think a good idea to recognize what we're feeling, sit with our feelings for a while, at the same time, not let necessarily our feelings take over and paralyze us. So that's kind of the idea of mindfulness, right? Is giving space for feelings and thoughts without necessarily having them take over. I love your ideas about, Jana, about flexibility as far as what's coming next. I like that the church has a lot of different options. So if you feel it really important to get back to missionary work at some point in the future, hopefully that will be made available to you. If you feel like it's time to just kind of hang that up on the towel rack and move on to the next phase of your life, that's available to you. I would hope that parents really take a step back from dictating their thoughts and processes about those types of choices, and instead would just be encouraging listeners. I think sometimes as parents, it's hard for us not to project what we think is best for our kids. And we do have a lot of wisdom for our kids. So I think it's important for us to share our wisdom with our kids. At the same time, we're also faulty in what's best for our own kids sometimes. Sometimes we really, aren't tuned enough or are too biased in our own ways of thinking to think, oh yeah, what's going to be best for my kid is that they get back out there. Or what's going to be best for my kid is to not go back out there, and to really allow the wisdom of your own child to flourish and to come through so that you can support whatever decision is primarily driven by them. So that would be my thought and hope for parents. I do think it's hard to let go of our parenting power dynamics and to let our adult children adult. We sometimes tease our adult children that they're having a hard time adulting, but sometimes we're having a hard time letting them adult, which oftentimes means watching failures, watching regrets, watching mistakes, and that's all part of successful adulting. so if we can, kind of step back and allow for that to kind of go forward without a lot of interference. I do think adult parents of adults have an opinion, and it's one thing to say, hey, this is what I'm thinking, or knowing you and being your parent, these are some ideas I have, or these are some concerns I'm wondering about. That's all very different than you should, or if you don't, or we're only going to pay for, or those are very different approaches. So I do think you have a right in your own home to have some boundaries and some ideas about chores, and if you're going to be living in this home, everybody should participate in some way, and hopefully those are things that you can talk about in a way that you would kind of like with roommates and with anybody who'd be living in your home, but not in this like punishing kind of, anytime you're treating a 19-year-old like a 10-year-old, you're probably going to come across some issues. So anyway, be mindful of that. If you're the young adult yourself, just know we love you, we support you, we're so proud of you. In my book, whether you go out for 2 days or whether you go out for 2 years, you have served, and your heart was in a place where you wanted to do something really lovely with your life, and that service is very, very valuable. I do think we need to do a better job as an overall culture to loosen up in our expectations and not see people as worthy or not worthy depending on these types of choices. You can live a wonderful, worthy, beautiful, messy life, whether you've served a 2-year mission or a 2-day mission, whether you got married or didn't get married, whether you had premarital sex, whether you didn't have premarital sex, whether all these things that you're currently trying to navigate in your life will work out, whether you have regrets or not, whether you feel like you've made mistakes or not, whether you've had certain experiences or not. And I like the wisdom that I think Jana said, that life gives us all kinds of things that we didn't plan for. If you look at, I always like to tease us that if you look at any interesting scripture story, it's because things were kind of messy. Otherwise, it wouldn't be interesting. So any type of story that we talk about in the scriptures, it's cool. It's because something didn't go as planned, or people had to face a challenge they weren't expecting, or they had feelings that they weren't expecting, or, so how can we use our spiritual and faith-driven practices to help us instead of to kind of feel like it's a whip against us at this particular time? So those are my thoughts, and I sure appreciate everybody's willingness to be on today. So Jana and Jenny, you had wonderful thoughts, both of you. And again, if you're having more questions that you'd like for us to answer, please feel free to share those. We try to take a public question every week here at Symmetry Solutions Strategies, where some of the providers at Symmetry will get on and answer those for you. Just so you know, Symmetry Solutions is an online and in-office practice, although these days it's online. So where we offer both mental health therapy services as well as wellness and life coaching services, depending on the issues you're coming with and also the geography you're in. We have licensed providers in several states, not in all states, but we also offer wellness coaching, which is very helpful in regards to some of these maybe more solution-focused issues that you might be dealing with. So feel free to use us as a resource. If we're not a good resource, we're always happy to refer you to a resource we may be aware of. So feel free to message us. Our website is symmetrysols.com. And we have people who can answer the phone and answer your questions, and or if you email us or Facebook message us, we can get back to you. Any other things that I'm forgetting to talk about? Jana, Jenny?
No, I think that was beautifully said. I think it's a time to lead with listening, love, and support, and an abundance of just, of leaning into just being in relationship.
Yeah. Awesome.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
All right. Well, thanks for being with us. Thank you, Jenny. Have fun in Florida. Thank you, Jana, in Utah. And I'm now back in Kansas, but I'll be back in Utah at some point too. So, all right, everybody. Have a good weekend. Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us today on Mormon Mental Health Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please help us and become a monthly subscriber at mormonmentalhealth.org. The goals of this podcast include education, advocacy, and the mental health and general well-being of Mormons and their families. We can't further this work without your support. Music for this episode was provided by the Lower Lights.
Over life's tempestuous sea, chart and compass came from thee. Jesus, Savior, pilot me, unknown ways before me roll, hiding rock and treacherous show, chart and compass came from thee. Jesus, Savior, pilot me.
As a mother stills her child, thou canst hush the ocean wild, wondrous sovereign of the sea. Jesus, Savior, pilot me.
Boisterous wave, obey thy will,
obey thy will.
when thou sayest to them,
Be still.
wondrous sovereign of the sea. Jesus, Savior, pilot me. when at last I near the shore, and the fearful breakers roar, may I hear thee say to me, fear not, I will pilot thee. Twixt me and the peaceful rest, then while leaning on my breast, may I hear thee say to me, fear not.